Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Wolf. I'm the programming coordinator at the Osterville Village Library. Thank you so much for being here today. And to our friends joining us on Zoom, thank you for being here as well. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting author Jill Mays as she talks about her book, Nurturing Nature, A Guide to Gardening with Special Needs. Jill is an occupational therapist specializing in sensory integration for many years. She has conducted workshops in a variety of settings and provided consultation to parents, educators, and healthcare providers. For the past 10 years, she has immersed herself in gardening, working with farmers, and assisting in the development of children's garden programs. She developed and currently leads a garden group for special needs adults. Without further ado, here's Jill Mays.
Thank you so much, Amy. And I want to especially thank the Osterville Village Library for hosting me today. And I also want to thank Meg and the Titcomb Books because they are representing and selling books here, and I'm so appreciative of them doing that. So today, this is what I hope we're going to cover today. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about my garden journey, and which segues into being involved with the Truro Children's Garden in the Truro's library. They developed a community garden, and which segued into my involvement with capabilities and having a group weekly in the nice weather. And then I will talk about the impact of gardening and nature on our health, our well-being. It's kind of amazing, everything that the scientists are coming up with. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what they're learning, which kind of blew my mind, because you feel good when you're out in nature, but actually I didn't know how much nature was doing to help me. I'll talk about also, in addition to all of that, I will focus on some of the studies about specific populations who have special needs. And I will then talk a bit, because it is a guide, about how you can make gardening accessible to various populations who have some challenges. So, if there's time, I will kind of zip through examples of the different activities that we do during throughout the year. Starting in January, we could all be doing stuff in the house, right in the middle of those snowstorms. Okay, so my garden journey. So back in Connecticut, many, many years ago, I had 3 boisterous preschoolers, and I absolutely loved them, but I had a special need, and that was I needed some peace and quiet. I worked full-time within a private practice, and I juggled the kids, and this was in the late 80s, and in sort of the organic movement, organic food and being healthy was beginning to percolate. So I said to my husband, hey, how about if we have a garden? He had family, distant relatives that were farmers, so he jumped on it. Yeah, let's do that. Problem is, we were living in Connecticut in a state forest, so there wasn't really a lot of light, but we found a little patch and we put the fences in. We dug wood into the ground and the perimeter so that the animals wouldn't dig in. We did all those kinds of things. We did learn that well, first, what I will say, and so I would go out in the garden, and those few moments of peace, because he would take care of the kids he did the heavy lifting of preparing the garden, but I did the rest. And he would take care of the kids for a few minutes in the evening, and then maybe an hour or so over the weekend. And those moments in the garden were magical to me. I just felt so calm and at peace. And that was the start of my journey. Now, I mentioned we were in a state forest. So what we did discover is once the leaves were on the trees, the giant oaks and the tulips pretty much blocked a lot of the sunlight. And guess what? Plants really like sun. And so we didn't have a lot of tomatoes and peppers that require a lot, but in the spring before the trees fully leafed, we had beautiful, greens, spring greens. Anyway, we did that for a few years and it was fun. And again, I loved being in the garden, but I can tell you the exact moment I gave up the battle of the challenge of gardening on our woodsy property in Connecticut. What happened was that my private practice, I had a home office. And so one late spring day, I was waiting for this little guy, Jack, to come with his mom. It was 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was waiting and admiring my garden. I had red lettuce and I had green lettuce. Oh, it was so pretty. And I said to myself, or maybe I said it out loud, I don't know, it looks like we're going to be able to have lettuce this weekend. I'm so excited. Jack came, I worked with him for an hour. His mom picked him up. And so I went back over to look at my beautiful lettuce. It's all gone, mowed down. And I went, I give up. So some animal either heard me or agreed, was looking and saying, yeah, you're right. We better get it before she does. I don't know. But by that point, we had a little cottage in Truro. And so my husband said, look, I'll build you a box out there, a raised bed. Except for those of you who know Truro, it is truly a sandbar. Like you get like this much soil, literally, and then it's totally sand. So it was a raised bed, and I spent lots and lots of time figuring out how to augment the soil, and which brings me to the Truro Library. In the summer, I would go there every single week, coming with armloads of books about gardening. And as you all know here on the Cape, these villages, the library is the heart and soul of the community. And so the librarians get to know everyone, even those of us who only come over the summer. And so the librarian who was head of youth services had noticed I checked out 1 million books on gardening. And she also knew my background in working with children. And so she said, hey, I'd like you to come meet someone. So she took me out back where they have a lovely pergola and yard. And I hadn't noticed before, but a garden, a couple of raised beds. And there were kids running around. And she said, I'd like you to meet someone. And so she introduced me to Francie Randolph, who happened to be one of the co-founders of Sustainable Cape. I don't know if any of you had been to the Truro Ag Fair when they used to have it, and they have a farmer's market, but that all was because of Sustainable Cape's mission of educating people, bringing farmers and the community together. And Francie was passionate with the idea that introducing children to gardening will make them lifelong appreciators of nature and gardening and the importance of healthy food. So they asked me to volunteer, and I was happy to do that. And the first thing I learned is that when children grow food, it is a gateway to eating vegetables. Because so many kids were like, I don't like vegetables. But when they plant the bean seed, and then they plant the bean seed, and then they watch it grow, they have to try the bean. And guess what? Beans that are fresh off of the vine actually taste delicious. And so many of them, many kids that the parents said, oh, they're terrible fussy eaters, learn to eat the vegetables. So let me tell you about the children's garden. This is how it works. The kids come in the off season. It's a small group because Truro is a small community. And so, there might be 6 to a dozen kids, and we divide up there's a lead farmer who kind of directs what's going to be planted and the tasks that are going to happen. And then the farmer divvies up the tasks, and then the volunteers will help out, will take a group of kids. In the summer, when, there's 20,000 people living in Truro, that group can swell to 30 or 40 people. And then we'd have that many, we'd have, I don't know, 3 or 4 volunteers that divided with those groups. Anyway, so there were the typical tasks like planting things and weeding and, whatever the various garden tasks would be, and harvesting, of course. And in the process of that, they would be learning about measuring and growth and how the sunlight and the temperatures affect all the kinds of things you need to know. They were really absorbing that information. What happened at the end of each group is that we would have a harvest feast. So that was always fun. We'd gather and while that's going on, there would be some journaling. So we would report on what kinds of, the kids would talk about the weather, the temperature of the soil. We also always grew sunflowers. And so they would measure the sunflowers every week. And that was really kind of a fun gathering. And then before they left, they got goodie bags where they would bring home things that we had harvested for their families. You would think that they were going after gummy worms, the way they would clutch those cherry tomatoes and green beans and everything else that was available for that day. So along with seeing all the garden skills that the kids were learning and acquiring, what I began to notice as an occupational therapist is that that particular position look familiar to you if you do Pilates or yoga or anything? Anyway, it's a tricky position that really uses the core muscles. And what I saw with the children is that as they worked, they were really activating all the kinds of things that I worked on in the clinic. They were building core strength, they were building upper arm strength, they were building balance because you had to kind of zip through the different rows and the beds. They were developing hand hand coordination, bilateral, for instance, if anyone has done any growing like of vine, let's say snow peas, if you just yank it with one hand, what might happen? The whole thing might come out of the ground. So they learn how to be able to pull, they have to use two hands. So bilateral, that's something that I worked hard with kids in the clinic. Visual attention, you have to know whether you're weeding out a plant that's desirable or a weed to get out of the garden. So planting the seeds, you've got to pay attention to that. So there's lots of that happens. Another thing is the tactile. A lot of kids didn't like touching, and when they were working in the soil and with the vegetables, the various growth, their hands were getting desensitized if they were the kind of I call hypersensitive or tactily defensive. So that was a very important thing because kids that tend to be that way tend to socially will be uncomfortable. It's a stressful kind of baseline stress level for them. So that was going on. And I was noticing all of those kinds of things. And I will also say that having I'm showing this plant sprayer, which was actually used in a classroom setting, and because for children developing hand skills, just squeezing kinds of exercise things, they just do some of the muscles, but the deep down ones that you need for really refined skill develop with very specific movements. And a plant sprayer like this is the perfect thing to do that. And so it's great for kids to develop the hand strength, the musculature for dexterity, but all the way through the developmental, arc. At the other end, there's a use it or lose it thing. So a lot of us that have, as we're getting older, we have specific tasks we do, but we might not any longer use those deep muscles, and use it or lose it. If you don't have those strong muscles, you can start to have joint problems. So the sooner you get, as much as you can maintain that, it's a great thing to do. So I was seeing all these great benefits from the children's garden. At a certain point, Francie and Sustainable Cape decided they wanted to expand the program, and they developed a program, Farmer in the School. And so a woman named Stephanie Rhines, who is a market farmer, but also an extraordinary educator, she developed a program to take into the Truro Central School for a whole day, every single class would get like a half hour or an hour or whatever. I forget what it is. Anyway, but she needed a helper. So they asked me if I would be willing to spend all of Friday. This was by the time I moved up here full time, which was like 12 or 13 years ago. So I would spend all day Friday volunteering to make it like feel a little bit special, not just a helper for the whole day. I had already, I had previously published a book. So they said they'd call me the documentarian to sort of make it sound special. Anyway, so I took it seriously, and what I would do is I would document everything that Stephanie had done, since it was a developing program. And being an occupational therapist, I could not help myself but say, oh, and it develops bilateral coordination, and oh, it does this and that and the other thing. Anyway, what happened was, so the community, the local community businesses were very generous in helping with both the library and then this farmer in the school program. And they had, so for instance, the local nursery would donate a huge pile of compost that the sixth graders were tasked with transporting from the pile to the raised beds. These kids went crazy. Like, they looked so heavy. First of all, we did have a snowstorm on the Cape this past year. So you remember when you're shoveling, it's hard work. So it's kind of exhausting work. Well, these kids were eating it up. And I began to go, I think I know what's going on here. And I think that they're doing so much heavy work. Now, in my clinic, a lot of the children I work with have neurodiverse issues, so that they have regulation issues. And one of the first things and consistent things I do almost throughout therapy is give them heavy work activities, things like jumping on trampolines, doing wheelbarrow walking, crab walking, lots and lots of things that make them have to work against gravity. And what that is doing is it's stimulating something called proprioceptors, which is for activating the proprioceptive system, which is another sensory system that we don't really talk about. And the proprioceptors are in the joints. So a neurologist, this is the way a neurologist would test it. He'd have you close your eyes, and then he'd say, is your hand up or down? And I say down. Is it up or down? I say up. I don't have to look. I know because I can feel it. And you're thinking, okay, this is about gardening. Why is she talking about a neurologist testing someone? The reason is because those proprioceptors, when they get activated, they shoot up to the brain and they activate these neurons called inhibitory neurons, the nerves in the brain that say, you don't need to pay attention to this. So like Super Mario Brothers, if anyone remembers that game, erasing things, that's what because there's billions of input that go into the brain every second. And the brain has to process it all and decide what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So the more proprioceptive input, just like the more you exercise muscle fibers, the stronger they get, the more you provide that input to the brain, the more you're activating the filters that help the brain work in a way that's efficient and figures out what to pay attention to and what not to pay attention to. So for you gardeners out there, when you weed a bed that was a big mess, and you weed it, and then afterwards you look at it and you say, I feel so great. This looks great. Well, yeah, you feel proud and great because it looks so much better, but your internally, you actually are feeling better because you did all that heavy work. So Capabilities in the Truro Library had a really nice relationship of coming up. I think it's mostly Maggie and Hanelt would have like a lot of different groups. And they, as a thank you, one year they developed, the farm donated a standing standing table, kind of a planter bed, which you can see makes easy access for people not needing to bend over, and a wheelchair could get under it. The farm also provided the herbs. At a certain point, someone contacted the library and said, you know what? We have a lot of people in our program who, for one reason or another, are not able to participate in the farm program, but they still would really love to garden. So do you think we could pull something together? So Maggie, knowing my background, asked me if I would be willing to do that. And I was thrilled. So I then jumped to developing a program. It's once a week when the weather's good. And they would come up to the Truro Library. That's coming all the way from Hyannis. So it used to be Eastham, which was easier, but now it's Hyannis. So it was a long ride, but they'd come out, they'd bring a bag lunch, but put that over under the pergola, and then we'd have a little conversation of how they've been. And then we would go on a garden stroll. So we would, the library has what they call an edible landscape. So we would go through there, but we'd also go throughout the garden and we'd make observations about the growth. For instance, the raspberries, they're green. When do you think they're going to turn red? And each week we would look at the progress of that. But what we also did was we really observed things, the colors, the library, the children's garden especially, they are really very committed to helping with the butterflies. And so they plant milkweed, which is the only food that the monarch butterflies the larvae can feed on. So they have lots of milkweed, and they also have butterfly bushes, which are big, beautiful flower, purples and blues. Anyway, there's a lot of butterflies once it warms up, and they loved watching the butterflies. Well, why? You know, butterflies are fascinating because you look at them because they're still, and you can really look at all the beautiful, intricate designs, but then they fly, and then you're tracking them. So it's like really a wonderful visual perceptual exercise, actually. And they're really amazing. So they love looking at the butterflies. Another thing that we do is, anyone who's a gardener knows that mint is pretty invasive, and outside of the main garden, they've planted mint. It's also a wonderful thing. So we are invited and welcome to grab fistful of mint. And so I do that each week. And also lemon balm, which is also in the mint family. And I hand it out to each of them, a sprig of that, so that they can smell it and say, oh, what does that smell like? So the olfactory, so the smell system, which really evokes, the olfactory system goes right, the smells go right to an area of the brain, which is very close to emotions and memories. So it sort of is tweaking the brain a bit. After we do our tour, we always do a job. They are the sole maintenance people on the box. And they also do, I coordinate with the farmer of the children's garden, and she gives me suggests tasks for us to do. And typically weeding is one of them. And, you know, some folks, when they get started for the first time in the garden in the group, they'll be like, I don't really want to get my hands dirty, or I don't have the energy to do that. So I'll say, okay, 5 weeds, pull up 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yay, good for you. You did a great job. Next week, 10. On and on and on. By the end of the season, pretty much we can take a whole section of a bed or a whole bed and get it pretty much cleared out. So they really develop also people who are very reticent in terms of getting engaged with other people. They get pulled in by the garden activities. And by the end of the season or halfway through, they'll be helping each other, you know, one holding a pot while the other one's putting the dirt in, the soil in, or whatever. So you see really beautiful growth over the course of the garden. So we always have tasks. In addition to the chores, we have garden projects. We collect seeds, we plant the seeds. So a really fun thing is we collect seeds middle of summer to the fall, and then the next spring we plant them. And it's pretty amazing because they really do actually, you know, we don't have to buy them from a seed company. We actually are getting self-sustaining in the kinds of things that we grow. Now, the children's garden, they had the goodie bags that they take home, but capabilities felt that for dietary health reasons, they didn't want to take a chance on that. So I always made sure that there was some project that they did that they could take home. So for instance, you might notice that there's like all that, a lot of mint, because again, mint is something that's very expendable because it keeps growing back. Or another thing you see there are chives, because chives are another one that grow like crazy. Anyway, so that usually always it might be a bouquet, anyway, or some kind of a potted thing or a seed planted that they will nurture and grow on their own. So before I go on, but basically what would happen is by the end of the group, everyone was really happy. They would go have their lunch and then they would go home, but they seemed to be energized and happy, which gets us to what is it about nature that makes us happy? Now, we all live here on the Cape, I think, and I'm guessing for a lot of us, we did this because something about the water pulled us here. Am I right? Maybe, unless you were born here, but if you were born here, you chose to stay here, and that says something too. So there's something about water and nature that seems to just make people feel healthy and happy. Let's just say happy. So jumping way back to the 1800s, the nurse, Florence Nightingale, noticed that the patients who were exposed to nature, just outside, seemed to get better than the ones that were stuck inside. So that was interesting. Let's jump to the early 1980s, and there was a scientist named Ulrich who was aware of this. And so he did a study at a hospital in Pennsylvania. They looking at the medical records of people who had a colon, I think a colon, it doesn't matter which kind, but they had the same procedure. Some of them had rooms with a view of the trees outside, and some had a view out of the window of a brick wall. So one group had less requirement of meds, less complaints, and faster healing and faster discharge. Guess which one, of course, is the one that looked at the trees. So he thought, well, this is very interesting. So he decided to do a study. He did a bunch of studies, which I write about in the book. But this one I'm going to tell you about. He took a group of people and he took baselines in looking at stress levels, which are health indicators of stress, which are things like blood pressure and heart rate. And he drew blood and looked at cortisol levels, which is a hormone which is released especially when you're stressed. The cortisol is one of those really bad hormones you don't want floating around in your body very much because it really leads to disease. So he got the baselines, then he put them all in a room like this and gave them video of something really horribly gory, horrible. And then he took again all those measures again, and sure and lo and behold, he confirmed they were all super stressed out. All those levels were way high. So then he divided the group in half, and one half went and saw pictures of nature, and the other half went and saw pictures of urbanscape. Nothing gory, just pictures of buildings. And then, of course, they came back and they did the baseline again. They did the studies, the measures again, and the ones who looked at nature were totally back to baseline. The ones from the urbanscape group, nothing had changed. They were still stuck, really stressed out. So I'm going to jump a little bit further. They were doing lots and lots of EEG studies, looking at brain waves. They were doing that with lots and lots of people in the laboratory. A great invention happened. They figured out how to make mobile EEG. So I call it like an EEG cap. They plunk it on their head, and in real time, they can be reading what's going on in the brain. Pretty cool, right? So one particular study, there was a group of people that were walking around on the sidewalk in a city, And then they went into the park, and they're looking at, what's the activity that's going on there. And then they walk into the park and they look at what the change, if any changes happen. So what the EEG studies look at are something called beta waves, which are like, so for instance, I'm using a lot of beta right now to make sure that I remember to say everything. It's the hard thinking stuff. It's the to-do juggling your to-do list, doing a math problems, all those kinds of hard things that you do for a lot of the day. And the brain gets tired from that. But then there's also the alpha rays. Well, alpha, those are like the feel-good waves, people for meditation, they're seeking to get more and more alpha waves. It's like, that's that meditative, comfortable, floaty sense. And then there's another kind, which are gamma waves, and those are the ones that are really processing sensory information. So you're probably not surprised. A lot of beta activity going on in the street. As soon as they go into the park, not very far, the alpha takes over. So something was really going on. And I just want to make sure I got this. Yeah. So and we know not only water, we know you look at mountains, you look just at a forest. There's something about nature that is curative. There's something about it that just the brain feels happy and makes us feel happy. The scientists are thinking that, let's start with water. Thousands of years ago, humans, didn't have plumbing. They needed a water source to survive. So when they saw water, they were like, oh my God, we can live, we can survive because we have a water source now. So there's a very, very deep in our brain kind of comfort level and happiness with looking at water. And likewise with nature, for most of humanity, our brains are wired up to look at nature because that's what we looked at. Now, of course, that's shifted over the last couple hundred years. And I forget how many years ago now, but not too long ago in the United States, we shifted from a rural people to urban people, meaning there's more people living in the city than they are in the country. So, but we still have a lot of, as we know, there's a lot of the country that's, whatever. But this is a real problem for Japan. Japan is 92% urban. That's a lot. So they've been concerned, and the scientists have been doing a lot of studying about how nature is helping and what they can do to help facilitate people getting engaged in nature again. So but meanwhile, Japan has beautiful forests, cypress forests in particular. And so they do this thing called forest bathing. And some of you may have heard of this. Basically what it is that someone like a meditation or a yoga instructor or someone like that will take a group of people out into the forest, and they just stand there and kind of stand and look at trees. And then they they either meditate or they do deep breathing. There's various things, I'm sure, different practices, but they, just like with the looking at nature studies, they've done all kinds of pricking and prodding of people for their, all the measures like heart rate and cortisol levels, all that stuff. And indeed, they are finding that people go out in nature and lo and behold, they really have, everything goes to a very happy, healthy place. There was one doctor named Dr. Lee who is an immunologist. And he said, I think there's something more than just brainwavy type stuff going on. I think there might be something that nature does for the immune system, and I want to find out. So he took a group of businessmen to a 3-day camping trip in the forest. And of course, took the measures, all those measures, heart rate, et cetera. But he also drew blood. When he drew the blood, he also looked at something called their NK cells. NK cells stands for natural killer cells. So just like it sounds, these NK cells are like heat-seeking missiles zooming through the body looking for disease, like bacterial infections, viral infections, and cancer cells. So he was really interested to see if going in the forest, if the NK cell level would change. And lo and behold, after 3 days, the guys came back from the forest and their NK cells had gone up 40%. And even after a month, I think they were like at something like 20%. He did have a control group that was doing the same physical activity in the city, and NK cell levels just stayed flat. So he thought, you know, this definitely something's going on, but there's so many things going on in the forest. You know, you're breathing fresh air, you're the sunshine and whatever. He said, I need to do some more study on this. So now he took a group of people, 13, and locked them in rooms at night in a hotel. And he had half of the group have vaporized water and the other half slept with vaporized water with cypress oil, which is because he posited, he believed that there was something going on with the trees. And what the trees do is they emit an aerosol. And this aerosol is what he thought was making these people, the NK cells, multiply. So he put cypress essential oil into the vaporizers of half of the group. And after 3 days, their levels went up by 20%, just sleeping in the hotel room, inhaling a vaporized infused water. So then he finally went into his lab and put some solution like a cypress oil into the Petri dish. And after a certain amount of time, the dish was just loaded with NK cells, but not only NK cells, but all kinds of antibacterial, you know, everything kinds of stuff were going on. It was like amazing. So basically just standing in front of the trees and breathing them, you're getting healthier. Just being near them, it makes you feel better and it makes you healthier. So you think, great, this is about gardening. If all I have to do is go find some pine trees and stand in front of them, why am I thinking about gardening, right? Well, here's the thing. Dirt, just like the trees, they're finding also have antibacterial all kinds of micro organisms that are really, really healthy. So there's that. And there's some studies that have come out. It's a big leap because rodents are a lot different from humans sometimes. But what happens is there were rodents that were exposed to some kind of organic soil, and then they were put into a maze, and then there were rodents that were put into the maze without the benefit of the soil, and the rodents that were exposed to the soil did a whole lot better. So who knows whether it's making us smarter. I will tell you, harking back to the children's garden, I've never seen kids so engaged, making associations, remembering. I mean, you had kindergarten, you had early elementary school kids that are remembering photosynthesis, you know, and germination. Like, it's amazing how they were able to grasp concepts and things like that. So it's just a thought. And it also, as I've mentioned, really helps with people, especially with touch sensitivities, helping them learn to cope with that. And somehow the soil seems to be a good one to do that. That really helps them regulate their sensory system. So beyond that, I would say that gardening is sort of a big bump up in the nature. First of all, it is an explosion, just an extravaganza of sensory input. You've got first, obviously visual, you know, where you've got bright colors and different shapes, and in the wind, they move around. So there's all of that. You can have order and you can have kind of a random things, patterning. So you have all those kinds of things happening. But the bright colors, they bring birds and bees and butterflies. And now the science is really coming out more and more with how much just hearing background bird song is making people happy and calmer. So there's just so many things that happen in the garden. I've already talked about the olfactory, the smelling evokes memory. So then you think of the elderly population just being able to have, you know, inhaling the smell, the scent of something might bring back some happy memories. Living here on the Cape, when I smell sulfur, I don't think rotten eggs. I think back to when I played on the sandbars in the summer, and they're such happy, wonderful times. So it brings, when I inhale it, I'm like, oh, it smells so good. So there's lots and lots in terms of the sensory system that occurs that really, really help us. This is just a quick picture of my husband. Well, I tend to do the annuals. My husband really loves doing perennials. And so he has a great big asparagus bed, which is amazing because from May into June, we have delicious asparagus practically every night. And as a matter of fact, we have friends who come back to the Cape, and we're one of the first people that they invite to dinner, because then I'll bring a big bouquet of asparagus. But anyway, the thing is, other organisms like asparagus too, in particular the asparagus beetle. And if you let them come to the party, they're going to destroy your asparagus. So my job for a lot of the summer is checking out the asparagus and looking for the beetles. Now that is not a asparagus beetle. That is actually a ladybug. Because I have beautiful flowers and things in the garden, I have been able to attract ladybugs, and the ladybugs discovered the asparagus beetles, which they really love. So eventually I can not pick off so many asparagus beetles, and the ladybugs will do the rest of the job. However, circle of life, I pick out the asparagus beetles. I give them to my chickens. They're happy. They love me for giving them the asparagus beetles. And so they lay more eggs, but also the eggs have more protein because the beetles have protein in them. So that's all great. Okay, so the title of the book is For Special Needs. So this is the part where I'm going to tell you about a couple studies and how gardening has really, really helped people with some special challenges. There's several studies in which children that have autism spectrum disorder were engaged in garden programs, and their emotional IQ and their social IQs improved significantly when they were in the garden. Shifting to the other age range, people who are suffering with dementia, there's something called wander gardens. And what these are, they're designed where they're enclosed. You can have access from whatever facility, caretaking place that they are at, but they're enclosed so that they cannot get lost, and they're easy to navigate. And all the plantings are non-toxic if they're going to be consumed, and they also, the pathways are flat and safe. So what they found in a couple of studies is that the people who were involved were able to just walk around in the wander garden. Their agitation, their need decreased, their need for medication decreased. The families reported they were happier, and lots of things like that. And finally, interestingly, less falls. And they also saw an inverse relationship in the more time that they spent in the garden, the fewer falls they had. It was an absolutely direct correlation. So back to the standing table, because I promised that I would talk about the accessibility. We know that gardening helps all of us. So people who have challenges are even more prone to stress. So they're going to benefit. You can posit that they'll benefit even more by having some level of interaction with gardening. So a first easy step is this wonderful standing table that you can easily put wheelchairs scoot under it. And also for people who have joint issues, muscle, fatigue, low vision, they don't have to bend over. So it's a lot easier for them. It's very accessible. So I'm going to go through a lot of the different things in the garden that you can do I'm going to go back one because, yeah, there it is. So there's a lot of ways to make the gardening accessible. If you are going to go with a regular garden beds type of a thing, obviously raised beds are easier. And it's important if you do that, however, that particularly with wheelchairs and walkers, that the minimum distance apart should be, the pathway width should be 4 feet. And it's very important that the surface is really smooth and flat. The book gives a lot of solutions, a lot of options on how you do that, from very expensive to some affordable kinds of options. For visually impaired people, 3 feet is acceptable, but you want to have things, again, flat and easily not have things in the way. Equipment for people who want to garden, and particularly when you're talking about people as they're getting older and the body is starting to not be quite as robust as it had been. I right now use knee pads because I have low beds. And so I kneel down or sit down, plunk myself down on a pad. So there's that kind of solution. But now I think I'm going to bump up to a garden seat. There are all kinds of different garden seats you can get that are lightweight, that are easy to just move around the garden. So that is something I'm going to explore. It might be a Mother's Day present. I don't know. We'll see. There's rolling carts and all kinds of there's all kinds of mobility carts that people can look into depending on how much they want to invest. In terms of tools, first of all, there's companies that produce lightweight tools, extended handle tools, so they don't have to reach so far, bending as much, they can just go like that. Gripping, you have built-up handles, and you also have sticky gloves so that you're less apt to drop things that you're holding, like the tool that you're holding. And there are companies that have developed ergonomic tools, meaning, for instance, if someone has arthritis, it's important to have a fairly neutral kind of a hand position. So they have tools that are shaped in a way that you can just hold on. That way you don't have to be stressing the wrist joints. So there was something else about that. Okay, it'll come to me. Okay, so, but besides in the garden, a big garden bed, you can think outside of the box, or literally in a box. You don't have to have like a whole big plot of land in your backyard or front yard or whatever. You can really do things as simple as, just digging into your garage or your basement or whatever, and finding it can be any kind of container, as long as you drill or hammer in a couple of holes so that there's drainage, you're good to go. The boxes I'm showing there come from Brimfield. They're not mine, but any one of those would have been totally fine. And how cool would that be? I mean, it'd be kind of cool on your deck or your walkway near your whatever. And I went to Brimfield because my mission was to find these aluminum tubs, because I really think they're pretty cool. And another thing that you can do, and all of the nurseries around here, I believe, sell them, are things called, they're fabric sacks. So they're like about this big, and you fill them with soil, organic soil, and then you plant things, and they do really, really well. I have a friend who was telling us, yeah, I planted a few potato seeds, and he said, by the end of the season, I'm like digging in and I'm just getting fistfuls of potatoes. So that's a really cool thing. The Children's Garden has has those. And so it's a really, they're not that expensive. So they're a really great option for people who want to just do a little bit of this and that in terms of gardening. But also you can do pots anywhere that it's a little bit sunny, or, you know, if you want to do things like greens, it can even be dappled shade and the plants will thrive. And the other thing is in terms of making them really accessible, they have some planters apparently have actual casters on them, so you can move them around. And you also you can just put them on a dolly, a little cheap dolly that you get from, you know, a hardware store or something, or make if you're handy. So that is, I'm going to go to that picture. Oh, no, never mind. I'm just going to tell you about this picture because another alternative is to do vertical gardening. So that, especially for people with low vision, and again, people with some physical impairments, you can grow things up and the plants love it because they're up in the air and they get more airflow, and it's pretty. So that is another really good option for, for accessibility. Our time? 5 minutes? Okay, so really fast. I'm just going to zip through these quickly. In the book, there's every 4 seasons, and I have a lot of different activities for each. Pea shoots are something you can be doing all year long, but especially in the winter. And sweet potatoes are one of those super duper fun activities that you can do. You just buy an organic sweet potato, you plunk it in dirt, you keep it moist, and you end up with a whole bunch of shoots that you can plant. At the left-hand side over there, all that stuff flowing out of that box, those are all sweet potato plants. Okay. Okay. Spring, there's a million things. The book has like a whole thing on, you know, how you do this, that, and the other thing. So spring, there's a million things. Anyway, throughout the season, you can be harvesting seeds. Composting is something you can do year round. And the seed collecting I've mentioned already, and doing seedlings. Oh, but also seedlings, but also like journaling. That's something you can do. I'm a lazy journaler, but you know, a lot of different garden groups that can do things talking about their emotion. It can be just as cut and dry as, you know, what you planted, what you did, or you can do your emotions. You can draw pictures, you know, you can do whatever. And there's a lot of different resources out there about journaling. So basically what I want to wrap up with is that gardening, I hope you can appreciate, is really so important, but also so accessible from even I was thinking to say the toddlers, because in the children's garden, there's lots of from toddlers on, they're there watering and touching. But I do remember holding an infant and they're reaching out and touching the beautiful colors and shapes and things like that. So really throughout the lifespan, gardening is really a wonderful augmentation to your life. In the book, I spend a lot more time talking about a lot of the studies, for instance, but I have sprinkled through the book things called fun facts, which are little boxes that talk about different studies and different health benefits and whatnot. A lot of factoids, but in a way that you don't have to go through the weeds of, reading a science study, but you get the gist of what's going on. So there's lots and lots more of that. And then there's lots and lots of information in terms of, ways to adapt activities to make them easily accessible for people. And in the back, I have a huge resource section. So while this is sort of a book that's like gardening for dummies, and that it's, anyone can do this. If you really want to take it to the next step, or you just want more information, there's tons of resources in the back on how to do that. And you can do this. I haven't talked really about city environments, but you really can do this on a windowsill, just a pot with herbs in it. I guarantee you it's going to make you feel happier in your apartment or whatever. So from the smallest gardens to large plots, community gardens, I have to say, when I moved to Truro, it was my way to really become part of the community. I got to know wonderful market farmers. I never would have met them if I hadn't gotten involved with the volunteering at the Children's Garden, and the librarians and volunteers. It's a wonderful way to have the community come together too. So in closing, what I'd like to say is that if we nurture nature, nature will nurture us. That's that. Thank you. And I would like to thank, once again, I would love to thank the Osterville Village Library, but also Capabilities and Sustainable Cape and the Truro Library. I think we had a really nice partnership, and I'm very grateful for that because it's been a wonderful experience for me. And without those experiences, this book would not have happened. And so I hope that there will be a ripple effect with that. And finally, the Children's Garden and the library are built on land that had been the Wampanoag Nation's land. And so I want to thank them for that. So that's it. And I'm happy to open to questions.